Thank you, Hilary, for joining us at the Karma Summit. We are very excited to have you and get your learnings and expertise and share it with the thousands of nonprofits joining us from across the world. Uh, the first question which I wanted to ask you and get your inputs on is, the reset caused by the entire COVID crisis. It's the probably the largest thing which has hit across humanity
Mhm.
and changed lot of things. So wanted to get your inputs and thoughts that from a non-profit perspective, uh, what will be the changes in the nature of programs and grants that you're seeing based on your your role at Ford Foundation and also your experience in this space over the last couple of decades. Would love to hear from you. What changes, what remains the same because of the COVID
Mhm.
crisis, and especially from a nature of programs and grants perspective.
Well, thank you for the privilege of being here. And I think that's such an important question. For the nonprofit sector everywhere in the world, this is an existential crisis, and
Mhm.
we will come out of it with fewer organizations than we have going into it at a time when human need is even greater. And I think from the perspective of where I sit in philanthropy, we have to prepare to remake ourselves in how we interact with grantees. I'll give you the example just for the US, but in the US, over 60% of all nonprofit organizations were already financially vulnerable before entering COVID. Uh, most of them have less than 4 months of salary in the bank, and I think it's much worse in the global
Right.
South. So we, philanthropy, are part of the reason for that. The way we fund the sector keeps it weak. We usually give 1 year project-based grants. We set the limits on how much an organization can spend on quote overhead, meaning all the all the things like technology
Yeah.
that are necessary for them to use now,
Mhm.
when in fact, so we need to move away from project-based support with and the starvation cycle that keeps that keeps nonprofits
Mhm.
from being strong. And we need to move towards multi-year general operating support and trusting our partners. And we have to trust them now
Mhm.
because they are at the front lines and they are radically adapting and innovating the way they're structured. And we have to change to keep up with them.
Got it. Yeah, I think very important points on the financial vulnerability of nonprofits, which is already there and which gets even worse because of the COVID crisis. And I think you bring about a very important point on the overheads on the project-based financing, which means that almost nonprofits are on on oxygen support all the time, and they
Yes.
can't scale. They're always in a survival mode rather than scaling and innovating. So. Uh, that's a very important point. uh, Also wanted to understand that from a you know the nature of grants you mentioned, it would become more longer term and more organizational support perspective. So is that a trend that you're seeing uh, getting accelerated because of COVID, and is this something you see across different foundations?
Yeah. It's a trend we will see accelerating.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the standard practice, and in the recent years just before COVID hit, the
Mm-hmm.
amount of money that foundations spent on general support was going down, not up.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a very promising thing, an opportunity in the crisis, is that funders are being pressured to change.
Mm-hmm.
We helped put together a pledge for certain kinds of new behaviors for funders that include general operating support and much more flexibility for grantees, that was posted on the Council on Foundations website. Over 700 um, foundations have signed that pledge from all over the world. So, they've committed to making a
Mm-hmm.
set of changes, and we are very, very hopeful that they will in fact follow through.
Got it. So in a way, the COVID crisis is almost like an opportunity to like transform or reimagine the way the sector operated. So in a way, it's an opportunity as well for us.
It should be. It should be. We'll see.
Got it. No, it's very encouraging because that helps nonprofits scale like any other organizations, build capacity in the right areas rather than just focus on execution of a particular project and not thinking long term. So uh,
Yeah. Well, but just the word you just used makes me a little bit nervous, the word scale,
mhm,
because not every nonprofit needs to scale in order to be healthy or
mhm,
in order to do what it does well.
mhm,
And I think, one of the questions nonprofit leaders need to be asking themselves at this time is, what can we stop doing? Are there things we do that other nonprofits are better at than
mhm,
we are? And
mhm,
can we partner with them to be more effective? Can we, can we merge with
mhm,
another organization and be stronger? And I think sometimes we are our own worst enemy,
mhm.
by saying that scale is the only way you
Correct.
can attract more capital and more
Mhm,
resources,
mhm.
and that's a dangerous way to be thinking.
No, completely agree, and especially when the resources are constrained, I think partnerships and collaboration is very critical.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah. Uh, Also wanted to understand, the COVID aspect. One is how the changes in the funding, distribution and structures, but also post funding in terms of once the projects go live. One critical part is monitoring impact,
hmm,
and foundations have been and should actually have a very high emphasis on monitoring the progress and impact of projects. But a lot of that was dependent on doing site visits or getting last mile data. So just wanted to understand how does that change as well in a world where just moving outside your homes is not safe enough. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think 4 months in, we're all learning, right?
Mhm,
What I hear, though, from talking to our grantees and to our program officers, is that in a funny way, they're talking to each other more during COVID,
mhm,
and the power differential between them is less. So
mhm,
those conversations are more honest.
mhm.
For one thing, everyone is on Zoom, and
Yeah,
everyone is checking in with each other and how they're doing, and everyone has their children, their dogs,
yeah,
their parents, their
yeah.
families around them.
Mhm,
So it is a really different thing than when a funder comes to the organization or when the
mhm.
grantee goes into the building
Got it.
of a foundation.
Mhm,
So I think that that's actually an interesting change. And
mhm,
then the other thing that we at least are finding is, not only we've asked all of our program officers to reach out to their grantees
mhm.
proactively and check in on how they're doing. So they're not waiting for the quarterly monitoring call.
Yeah. Mhm,
They're doing that proactively.
mhm,
And then groups of grantees are coming together to talk as cohorts or groups
mhm.
about shared problems, together with program officers. And that's very unusual. It used to be that there was sort of a hub and spoke
Mhm.
kind of system where the foundation sat at the center, but it's being recentered to be really more about the shared problems they have. So, for example, arts organizations that are no longer able to
Yep.
hold
Mhm,
performances or
mhm,
raise resources are
mhm,
all on common webinars,
mhm.
sharing with each other, well, this is what we're doing, to get our performances out there, or this is how we're starting to try to raise money. So not to be overly optimistic about what is really a very challenging situation, but I think we have an opportunity to recenter what monitoring and continuous improvement actually means, and to have it be more curious and more collaborative.
Got it. So, in a way, the COVID situation leads to like more communication, which leads to more collaboration and more proactiveness rather than a tick mark exercise. So, yeah, that
Yes.
makes.
I mean, I think we will see how that goes, right? I think
Mhm,
everyone kind of rallied together to do their best, thinking
mhm.
that this would be a 3 or 4 month
Yeah.
disruption.
Mhm,
And now that it is going to be really much longer
yeah.
than that,
Mhm,
I think staying the course for
mhm,
all of us
mhm.
will require asking just the kinds of questions that you were
Yeah.
asking, like in what ways are we innovating
Mhm.
that we can keep doing, and how do we sustain that? How do we get the best out of what we've been learning?
Got it. Got it. And also, you mentioned about let's say arts as a focus area, and there are certain focus areas like healthcare, which may be getting more than the
Yes.
normal funding, but there are a lot of others which actually funding has dried up. The sources of funding, the ways in which fundraising used to happen has changed. So, what is your advice to nonprofits operating in that space, which are probably not directly in the line of COVID relief or rehabilitation. So, what's your advice and inputs to such nonprofits?
I think it's really hard. There's no two ways about it.
Mm-hmm.
And for smaller nonprofits, they usually don't have a development function. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's not easy for them to raise money through traditional channels.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of young, small nonprofits are using crowdsourcing,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think figuring out how you use technology to have a more direct outreach to people and through social media and others is one thing. I think for those who have and I think that a lot of activity, um, going back to what we were talking about before, what can you stop doing in order to do your most core essential things? And then where you do have existing funders, have an honest conversation with them. Tell them what you really need. Don't pretend that everything is fine. Uh, and in general, I think, again, if nonprofits can try to shift the conversation to be not just what emergency fund do we need in the next year, but can we talk to you together about the next 2 or 3 years and how to structure your support.
Got it.
Those are hard conversations to have.
Yeah, I think it's a hard conversation, but probably extremely important and necessary to have, and do it
Mm-hmm.
as soon as possible rather than leave it for later.
Yes.
Because, as you mentioned, this is not a short-term thing, but actually a medium to long-term thing, and would change a lot of stuff for nonprofits. So, uh, also wanted to understand that if, let's say, for a small to mid-sized nonprofit, if you were to give like three key action items, or three things that they should take
Mm-hmm.
away, or that they should think about or implement at their nonprofits, what would those three things be? And especially for a nonprofit which has just a couple of months of funding left, difficult to raise large amounts, but there are hundreds and thousands of such nonprofits. So what would be like your three-step action item for them?
Yeah. I think first, sit down with yourself and really think through what you think your viability is. If you are running out of money and you don't see where the next resources are coming from, you have to start to think about what costs would you cut, and that's very painful. Would you lay people off? Do you put people on furlough? Do you stop doing things? So I think first is just to create. Panic makes it hard
Mm-hmm.
to do that kind of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But unless you do it quickly and early and you know the costs you can get rid of fast, you don't have a chance to recoup later. So that would be my first piece of advice. The second is to take care of your staff, to recognize how difficult this time is for so many of them. And it sounds contradictory to the first thing that I said, but I think wherever you can, to be extraordinarily generous. Know that people will work hard because they believe in what they're doing, and even if they're working from home and they can't work 8-hour normal kinds of days, you don't need to question whether or not you have productivity or commitment. So I think, just understanding how challenging it is in a time like this would be the second. And then I guess the third would be go to whoever your deepest pocket funders are and really try to get enlist their help. But there's no two ways around how hard this time is.
Got it. I think the first point you mentioned is really important, is just being honest with yourself and looking at the numbers. Everyone in the space is very high on emotions, and wants to
Yeah.
actually create an impact, and they should be. But I think at this time it's also critical to just be honest, look at the numbers, and take some practical, some difficult decisions. But I think it's critical from a long term vision and impact that the nonprofits wanted to create. So I think it's very important to just sit back, reflect, and look at the numbers and dig into details and understand exactly how and when things will pan out, and take the necessary
Yes.
actions much sooner than later. So,
Yes.
got it. Yeah. Is there, and maybe slightly moving tangentially, but just wanted to understand that are there new opportunities getting created here, or are there new ways of delivering programs, or new ways of engaging with your right audience? So just wanted to understand, does COVID also, a lot of things change, and whenever things change, it creates opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So have you seen some of these new changes, new opportunities, which potentially could be something which nonprofits can benefit from?
Yes, 100%. I mean, nonprofits are reinventing how they deliver services.
Hmm.
For one thing, I think societies are questioning whether they, the assumptions they make. I'll take again an example in the U.S., but there are countless ones from other parts of the world. But you know, why is the solution? Why do we incarcerate so many people? And isn't it possible to decarcerate them if they're incarcerated for a low-level crime? And doesn't that help everyone be safer? Why is it that we have hotels going bankrupt? Couldn't they be remissioned to house the homeless? So I think they're big ways that we can be reimagining what it means to think about public safety in the deepest sense of that word. And then I think many organizations are figuring out how they reach audiences and people through technology in a way that they have not imagined doing before. And sometimes, again, going back to arts and culture, that can actually be more democratic and more inclusive, because you can reach audiences that weren't able before to buy a ticket or to see your performances or to view your museum collection or whatever.
Yeah, I think one way to look at it is that the physical or social distancing means people can't view certain performances,
Yeah.
but another way to look at it is that it's now borderless, so you could have the whole world view it. So it's a half full, half empty kind of thing, but there are a lot of
Yeah.
potential ways to benefit as well.
I think one
Yeah.
of the most important things, though, is really, COVID has ripped away all the veneer. You really do see the inequality that is in our societies and how racialized it is,
Yeah.
how gendered it is. Who the essential workers are who are working to keep us all safe.
Mhm.
And there again, I think there are now efforts to crowdsource, to provide resources to support those people. But then, to really ask the question, what kind of a society do we want to be if we don't have social protections that extend for everyone? And so I'm hopeful that there will also be a new look at public policy changes coming out of COVID that really start to question the very scarcity models that we have had in the past and are more inclusive.
Yeah.
And more
I think
radical.
I think the word radical and reimagined, strike a lot. And I think, it's made everyone rethink from the fundamentals. And actually, the theme of the summit is actually rebuilding our communities. And, we have the opportunity to do it in the right way. So ensuring justice, ensuring sustainability, access, right use of technology. So, I think need to think.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
sustainability is a huge, I mean, that is a major area for innovation, right? We're all seeing
Yeah.
that. And we're all seeing what it looks like to have an environment that for a little while is
Yeah.
cleaner,
Yeah.
and how that affects people's health. Yes.
Yep, totally. Just shifting towards volunteering now, and what we have seen with working with nonprofits is that obviously fundraising is difficult in today's scenario, but a lot of let's say work can be done, or nonprofits can in some way engage with volunteers to be helping in their operations or in their mission. So just wanted to understand your thoughts around volunteering, and in the new normal, what does that mean for nonprofits?
Mm-hmm. I think of that in two ways. I think about it in the traditional way. What does it mean to have volunteer staff, that it can extend your reach?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for many nonprofits, they will be turning to volunteers more. That is not without cost, though. To really manage and use
Yeah.
volunteers well, you have to have systems
Mm-hmm.
set up for that. So I think that will require a certain amount of innovation, but is a very powerful way to extend the reach. And again, you could imagine you might imagine whether there might be government programs at the local level or the state or province level or national that would say, let's make money available to nonprofits. If they can use a group, a large set of people to extend their services, we will help pay some kind of stipend or wage, for those volunteers. If the nonprofit will curate opportunity and deploy them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are ideas to think about. I also think about volunteerism, though, in another way, and that is all the kind of community-based organizing and self-help work that we are seeing, which is not really run through a nonprofit, but it's just people and communities coming together to solve their problems. And, sometimes I think the very professionalized, staffed world of nonprofits that moves away from sometimes the kind of self-engagement that communities do as they are empowering themselves. And I think those kinds of movements that we're seeing are actually really, really exciting and powerful, because that is people being citizens, not consumers, not receivers of services, but citizens themselves. And I think that that's a very important thing.
Yeah, I think, and that's also very powerful because, and again, using the word scale, but I think that is something which can scale also, once it becomes a people's movement, and it's something where citizens come together because they feel it is the right thing to do. And once you get a momentum of that, it can actually create massive impact. And especially during crisis time, and then that's when you have that internal urge to come and do something, and if you could channelize that urge in the right manner, it becomes very powerful.
Absolutely. And that's something that we should all be thinking about for our sectors. It's not just about one individual organization. It's about how do you catalyze large groups of people and organizations to work together to, in your words, actually build back better. Refuse to accept that we have to have some of the injustices that we have had in the pre-COVID world and in the COVID world.
Correct. Just wanted, while we conclude, wanted to understand from you, as we discussed, like rebuilding communities has to be a people's movement. And at Goodera, we are trying to create, a volunteering movement globally. We have created, the world's largest repository of virtual volunteering opportunities, so that, everyone from their homes, if they have that small urge to contribute back, can do it. Obviously, money is one way, but it's more about, actually doing good. And taking small baby steps, which obviously doesn't change the world, but at least adds in some way. So what would be the 3 words that come to your mind when you think about volunteering? Would love to hear from you.
I would say generosity. I would say necessary, and I would say life transforming.
Those are gems actually. So really, really great words, and very motivational for anyone to hear. It's and I think it's something which is in the I would say DNA of humanity, and I think we just need to in some way spark that, and once that comes up, I think it will get better and better. And I think anything every crisis humanity comes out better. So I think we just need to get the spark out.
Well, you are doing really wonderful and important work, and it's such a pleasure to have the chance to connect with you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Hilary.